Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. It's our pleasure to present you some of the findings of the newly launched report called the State of the Nordic Region 2020. And for this exercise, it's going to be the editorial team behind the report. So it's going to be starting with Linda on demography, then Gustav for the labor market section, and then myself with the economy section. And each of us will have a bit more than 10 minutes to present you some of the findings during today's webinar, and you will have the possibility to ask some questions, to write them down. And if there may be too many questions, you will have the chance also to join some webinars happening once a week, starting next week, where we'll go more in depth in each of these sections. And so that's more or less the agenda for today. But first, before going into the different section, it's good to maybe just give an introduction. What is the Nordic region? And whenever we talk about the Nordic region in this report, it's about the municipalities and the region part of the 5 Nordic countries, as well as Greenland, Faroe Islands, and Åland. And in all, we have 66 administrative regions since 2020 due to the merge of regions in Norway, and we have a bit more than 1,100 municipalities. And on the map that you can see on this first slide, we have 3 different colors, and they indicate the type of regions. And this is based on Eurostat typology. And so, for instance, the ones in red are the urban regions where at least 80% of the population is living. The ones in yellows are the one where between 50 and 80% of population is living in urban areas. And finally, the ones in green are the ones where less than 50% of the population is living in urban area. And we're going to use this typology in several parts of the report, and so we might refer to this term of urban, intermediate, and rural region later on. So that was it just for a short introduction, and now we're going to start the demography section with a short animation.
Less than 0.5% of the world's population live in the Nordic countries. Still, the region combined comprises the 12th largest economy in the world. Over the last 30 years, population has grown by almost 20%, 1/3 from natural increase, 2/3 due to immigration. Fertility rates are decreasing and are now at an all-time low in Norway, Finland and Iceland. Since life expectancy increases, the Nordic populations are getting older. Due to immigration, the populations are getting more diverse, which provides both challenges and opportunities for future developments. The Nordic populations are among the most mobile people in the world, with 13 to 16% changing residence every year within each country. This mobility also contributes to a high degree of urbanisation that brings planning challenges in both shrinking and growing regions.
So hi, as Julien said, my name's Linda and I was part of the editorial team for the report, and I'm going to talk you through a few of the key findings from the demography section. So within the demography section we had 3 chapters. The first was on fertility, children and young people, the second on migration, and the third was on ageing. So I'm just going to take you through, I guess, a few of the key themes. And as Julien said, you're welcome to write questions, and we encourage you to, but we might not get to all of them today. So please also add your email address, and then we can come back to you as soon as we can with answers to your questions. So demography, as we saw in the video, the total Nordic population has increased by about 18% since 1990. So proportionally, the increase has been the highest in Iceland and the lowest in Finland. And we can see that although a third of this population increase still comes from natural increase, so more births than deaths, the fertility rate is actually declining in all Nordic countries. So particularly in Iceland, Norway and Finland, we see that the fertility rate has reached an all-time low. Finland, we see particularly troubling numbers actually, and according to Statistics Finland, if the figures stay as they are now, in 15 years' time, there will be no region in Finland where births outnumber deaths. So if we take a look at the graph, actually, so we can see the numbers up the side are the number of births per woman. So the generally agreed upon number is about 2.1 births are required per woman to maintain the population at its current levels. And we can see that actually the Faroe Islands is currently the only place within the Nordics where this is the case, where we have births at a higher rate than this, so about 2.5 children per woman there. So in this context, immigration is making up a much larger portion, so 2/3 of the population increase. And this is bigger than and it has been historically. So we can see, if we want to kind of zoom into the municipal level, the map here gives us a bit more of a clear picture on the drivers of population increase at the municipal level. So we can see the blue and green colours show us where the population has increased. So the dark blue colours, we've seen both positive net migration, so more people coming than leaving, and a positive natural increase, so more births than deaths. The light blue colours, we can see we've had positive net migration, but negative natural increase, and the green colours, negative net migration and positive natural increase. So we can see that where the population has been increasing, so southern Sweden, Denmark, coastal Norway and southern Iceland, it's actually really immigration that's driving this. So we have very few municipalities coloured green on the map there where natural increase is actually the driver of the population growth. Then on the flip side, if we look at the reddish yellow tones on the map, we can see where the population is actually declining, so it's decreasing. So the red colours show where both natural increase and net migration are negative, so more people are leaving than arriving and more people are dying than being born. And then we see the pink colours, we have negative net migration and, we have negative natural increase and positive net migration. And the yellow colours, we have positive natural increase and negative net migration. So if we take a look, we can see even where the population is decreasing, immigration is still really important. So you can see the yellowish colours there in Norway, and much of northern Sweden. I guess if we look at, say, northern Sweden in comparison with Finland, for example, in Finland we have lower immigration rates and more of that dark red colour, whereas in Sweden immigration is kind of acting, I guess, as a bit of a buffer for the population decline that's happening as a result of natural increase being down. So another ongoing trend that we see from a demographic perspective is urbanisation. And this, so as we saw in the video, we have really high rates of internal mobility in the Nordics. So this means moving to a new place within the same country. So on this map, we can see the blue shows where the municipalities that have gained population in this way, and the red shows population decline. And I think what's really interesting about this map is that we actually don't see any major between country differences. So the picture looks quite similar in all Nordic countries. And so what we see everywhere is that most municipalities are actually losing population, but there are strong gains in the urban centres. And in this context, we often talk about a discourse around outmigration of young people from rural areas into urban areas and perhaps university towns as well. Here it can be quite interesting to take a snapshot of the population. So to look just at population development with respect to young adults. So here we can see in the map how the share of the population aged 20 to 29 years old has changed between 2000 and 2019. And again, the blue shows where the share of the population in this age group has increased, and the orange shows us where we've had a decrease in the share. So we see in Finland, Norway and Denmark, we sort of see a bit of support for this notion that young people are leaving rural areas in favour of major urban centres and university towns. But we see some quite interesting exceptions, I think, particularly in southern Iceland, and also all across Sweden. So I think here are some sort of pointers where we might like to look if we want to kind of challenge this discourse. The final demographic trend I want to touch on is ageing. And I don't think it comes as a shock to anyone that the Nordic population, along with most of the developed world, is ageing. The map shows us the portion of the population within the older age group, with the darker colours showing higher shares of people in this part of the population and the lighter colours showing lower shares. And I think we see sort of if we think back to that first map, the places that had the negative population development overall were also the places with the high shares in this map. And I think it's worth just briefly, before I wrap up, just to explain a little bit how we're actually measuring old age, how we're actually thinking about ageing here, because I think it's quite important from a policy perspective. So historically, and also in the previous editions of the report, we used the old age dependency ratio, which is a really simple calculation of the people over 65 as a proportion of the working age population. What we've done this year is we've used something called the prospective old age dependency ratio. And what this measure does is it looks at the portion of the population with a remaining life expectancy of 15 years or less, and takes that as a proportion of the population who have more than 15 years left to live. And again, we exclude those under 15. And the difference in this measurement, I think, is that it gives us this really interesting window of persons who are perhaps over 65, but not yet dependent on the state for support. So not yet, their health might still be really good, they might still be making a really good contribution to society. And I think it raises some interesting questions for us around what are these people doing, and how can we support them to age actively, to age in place, to be in better health for longer, so that we can kind of both ensure better lives for these people, but also from a fiscal perspective, reduce the burden on the public purse as the population ages. Cool. So I'm going to pass you over to Gustaf now, but first we have a short video.
What will happen with the workforce in the Nordic region? The working age population is expected to increase in the Nordic region in general, but decrease in rural areas. Two-thirds of all municipalities will have a shrinking labour force over the next 20 years. Overall, total population is expected to increase 8% by 2040, while the working age population only increases 1.5%, causing increased old age dependency. At the same time, calculations suggest that up to 1/3 of Nordic jobs could be automated in a decade or two. This mainly affects jobs in rural areas, and jobs in the private sector are more likely to be automated than jobs in the public sector. Still, the number of jobs in the bio and circular economy has gone up by 5 to 15% in the last decade, and many rural areas stand to gain jobs in this sector. Overall, the Nordic countries perform better than the EU average, with a Nordic employment rate at nearly 80% compared to 68%.
Hello, so I'm Gustaf, and I was the editor of the labor section in the report. The labor section consists of 2 chapters, one describing the geographies of labor, and the other one looking at the labor markets towards 2040, so looking towards the future. And as we heard in the end of the video, the Nordic, in general, the Nordic, when it comes to employment rate, a common indicator for showing the performance of the labor market, the Nordic region is doing well. With a high employment rate, and this is of course part of the Nordic model, which promotes full employment and that everyone should contribute to the welfare, and it's also part of the welfare model of the Nordic countries. And in an international comparison, it's mainly the Nordic countries particularly stand out when it comes to employment rate for women and for the older workers. And the employment rate is also connected to the economy, and the economy has been strong the last couple of years since the last report, and we can see that that the employment rate has increased in all countries, all the Nordic countries during this time period. And as you can see on this map, so this map shows the employment rate at municipal level, and where the green areas show the employment rate above 75%, and yellow areas indicating below 75%. And as you can see, it is still, and it's been a long trend, still Finland and Greenland that has slightly lower employment rates, and which has some structural reasons, so it's nothing new, but also we can say that Finland, the employment rate has grown more faster here than in the other countries. And as I said, this shows the employment rate on municipal level, and this is good in some sense. It can show the tax base for a municipality and the number of people that are working, but it also hides some information because like in the bigger cities, the municipalities are part of bigger local labor markets, and here it's maybe more interesting as an indicator of segregation rather than labor market performance. So that's one of the reasons that this year we looked at functional labor markets, local labor markets, and they are defined based on commuting patterns. And it's the region where the supply and the demand of labor actually meet, because people are commuting to their works. And it's been a long trend in the Nordic countries, but also in the world, that the local labor markets are growing due to expanding urban areas and changing commuting patterns, that it's easier to commute, basically. Yes, so this map shows the intensity of the colors. The red and the green shows the number of municipalities that are part of these local labor markets. And the green color indicates that it's employment rate above 75%, and the red areas that is below 75%. And of course, yeah, there are 365 local labor markets in the Nordic regions, where 162 of them are single municipalities, and they are the light hues here. So you can see, for example, in the northern parts of all the countries, basically. And in Norway, there are more of these single municipalities, basically due to the geographical specificities there, with mountains and islands. Yeah, so there are quite differences in the size, of course, of the local labor market. So the biggest one being Stockholm with 1.5 million workers, and the smallest one, the island of Utsira in Norway, if you see the circle to the left. And as you can imagine, there are quite different opportunities and challenges when it comes to critical mass and finding the right skills and all of those kind of things. And then to move towards the future, it's a big debate now in the literature, and in many organizations highlight the future of labor. For example, the International Labour Organization last year had their 100th year anniversary, and they focus on this theme. And they identify 4 megatrends that will shape the future of the Nordic labor, no, not the future of the labor markets. And it's demographic change, technological change, globalization, and climate change. And we found that often a local and a regional perspective is missing in this discussion. And we thought we wanted to contribute to that. So looking here first at the demographical change, this map shows the projected change in the working age population on a municipal level. So basically, yeah, where the working age population will grow and decrease. The red areas show here a decrease, and the blue areas show increase. And as you saw in the video, on a national level, even on a national level, it will differ between the countries, where Denmark, Finland, and Greenland and Faroe Islands are projected to have decreases in the working age population, whereas Sweden and Norway and Iceland are predicted to have an increase. But even more on a local level, it's a striking pattern where 72% of all the Nordic municipalities are projected to have a decrease, and the increase being mainly in the urban areas, as you can see on the map, mainly the capital cities and also the bigger main cities in the different countries. And of course, this is a challenge since population means tax base, and it will be, and we already now see that you saw the high employment rates, so it's not a big, there's not so much underutilized resources. So this is indeed a challenge for the Nordic labor markets. And moving on to the demand side of labor, that's also projected to change. It's been changing, of course, all the time. Automation has been going on for a long time, since the technical revolution or even before, but some now say that we are standing in front of the fourth technological revolution, which is artificial intelligence and machine learning. And there's one quite famous article by the Oxford economist Frey Osborne, but they tried to quantify this. And they came up with a number of 47% of the jobs in the US could be automated. Maybe you've heard about that. And we saw here the opportunity to take this this method to the Nordic level at the local level. And what we found was using this method, 32% of the Nordic jobs are in this high risk of automation category. And this is the brown areas of the map. They are above the Nordic average. No, they're below they're above the Nordic average, sorry. And the green areas are below the Nordic average. And yeah, well, there are many things, of course, to say about this. This is a discussion in the future. It's not the ultimate truth, and this, of course, can change. Yeah, I can say, but what our point here was the regional differences, and then we can see that the rural areas are more have more jobs in this category, and but you can also see it. Of course, there will come new jobs that are not invented yet, and maybe this is more a sign of the speed of the transformation of jobs rather than saying that there will be mass unemployment, because I don't believe that that will happen, because we at the same time have the big lack of skills. And just to conclude then, talking about skills, this is a quite complicated figure. Using data from Reglab in Sweden, it's showing the employment rate on the y-axis and then the matched employment rate on the x-axis, and where every bubble is one education group. And yeah, and the colors indicate the level of the education level, where the red and blue are higher education. And this figure shows that specialized education matters. It makes you more employed, and also that you work in what you're employed. But it also shows, like in the left side of the figure, that there are a lot of underutilized skills out there. And of course, with the changing labor market situation, the demand for skills will change, and this will require maybe lifelong learning, and that you change career. And it will be also a particular challenge for the smaller local labor markets, since just when one person with a key skill moves out, it will create a big challenge. But here we can also say that digitalization and automation can also be a tool for keeping services, but also driving innovation in these smaller local labor markets. Yeah, now I will hand over to Julien again after the video.
Households in the Nordic countries are among the wealthiest in the world. Still, there are differences both between and within countries. The Nordic countries have small wage gaps with an income inequality below OECD average. However, income inequality is increasing in the majority of municipalities across the Nordic region. Inequalities increased at a faster pace than the OECD average in Denmark and Sweden, but remained at similar levels in Finland and Norway, while narrowing in Iceland. In fact, Sweden has had the biggest growth in inequality over the last decades in the Nordics. Differences in income are particularly pronounced in the capital regions like Stockholm and Copenhagen, while the smallest income inequalities can be found across municipalities in Norway. Redistribution of income is highest in Finland and lowest in Iceland and Sweden. If you look ahead, the Nordics are among the most innovative in Europe, which points towards positive potential for future economic growth.
Yeah, hello again. So I'm Julien. I'm also part of the editorial team behind the State of the Nordic Region, and my task now is to present you only some of the findings from the economy section. And this section is actually including 3 different chapters, one on income inequality, a second one on smart specialization, and last one on bioeconomy. But before that, just to put you a bit more information within the Nordic context. So if you, for instance, take all the Nordic countries together as one single region, the Nordic region represents the 12th largest economy in the world. And this is based on GDP data for the different parts of the Nordic region. And as for the rest of the State of the Nordic region, the idea is to look at regional and municipal level. So on the map here on the right-hand side, you can also see the GRP per capita for different regions across Europe, and the regions that are marked in green are the ones that are above the European average. The ones in yellow are just below the European average, and the ones in brown are below the European average. And so, for instance, if you just look at the regions within the Nordics, you can see most of them are either marked in yellow or green, with the dark green being the regions with the highest GDP per capita. And just, to give you an example, Oslo is the region within the Nordic having the highest GDP per capita in 2017. And on the other side of the scale, you have the region of Kainuu in northeast Finland that has the lowest GDP per capita within the Nordics. So that was just an introduction, and then giving you some information about the chapter on income inequality. We have different data sets there and maps there, but the idea is to look at, why do we look at income inequality? The idea is to put it in the context of having municipalities and regions with relatively low inequalities in order to contribute to some social cohesion as well as trust towards institutions, among others. There are, of course, other reasons as well. And looking at the trends since the 90s within the OECD countries, this trend of income inequality is changing towards more unequal income within these OECD countries, and that's since the late 1970s. But that started later in the Nordic countries. It's more since the early 1990s. And when talking about income inequality, in that case, we look at the Gini coefficient, which is an index between 0 and 1, 0 showing that we have all the income distributed evenly within the household within that region or municipality. And if you have an index of 1, it means all the income are concentrated within one household. And this number is often multiplied by 100, so that's why, for instance, on this graph, you can see values between 15 and 30 something. And the line in black is actually the OECD average, and that's the line on top of the graph. And then you can see that all the Nordic countries have an average income inequality, or Gini index in that case, that is below this OECD average. You can see, for instance, the line in yellow, that's Sweden, that ended being the highest in 2017. And the trend has been quite similar now in Denmark, which ended also like having an increase during that period of time. Then you have a light blue line that is representing Iceland, where there have been more differences during this period of time, and that's, as you might be aware as well, from the crisis in 2008 that changed distribution of income within the country. And then in between you have cases like Norway and Finland, where there's been some rather stagnation during that period of time between 2000 and 2017. And so this is at national level, and the idea of the report is to dig in, looking at the same indicator, but at local level, to see really the differences between regions and municipalities. So we obtain a map like this, where the red colors indicate an increase in inequalities over a period of time, and the blue showing a decrease in income inequality during the period 2011-2017. And this period has been chosen due to data availability. And yeah, what you can see is, most of Sweden, Norway, as well as Iceland, this income inequality has been slightly or increasing to some extent, while it has decreased in the case of most of the municipalities of both Finland and Åland. And this is due to different aspects, due to economical trends, also labor force, etc. And then looking at this map that shows only the situation in 2017, you can see where these inequalities are highest in 2017. And again, the dark red colors indicate where this inequality is the largest, and the dark blue colors indicate where the inequalities are the smallest. And again, we find out that is mostly in urban regions, and especially in the capital city and regions of Stockholm and Copenhagen, where we have high income inequalities. And looking deeper at the data, we can see that that's often due to the fact of having quite high number of persons having very high income. And that contrasts quite much with the situation in Norway, where you can see a lot of municipalities have quite a low level of inequality, and for sure below the Nordic average of 25. And this is also looking at the data, we can see that the share of people having very low income and the share of people having very high income being quite limited in those regions in Norway. So that was some of the findings from the chapter on income inequality. And I would like just to briefly mention also about smart specialization, which is a bottom-up approach that aims at strengthening regions that are so-called lagging behind regions when it comes to innovation processes in Europe. So it's a European concept that has been developed and quite popular within the Nordic countries. As you can see on the map here, like the regions in blue are the ones showing an interest in developing such strategies. And those are, for instance, all the regions in Finland are there, as well as a couple of regions in Sweden and the majority of the Danish regions. You can also see that regions in Norway are interested into this EU bottom-up policy approach to regional development. And so that shows also the benefit of such a regional innovation approach. On the contrary, you cannot see on this map that things are also happening within Iceland, where regions are discussing similar approach than smart specialization, but since they're not registered to this European platform, you cannot see that on this specific map. And for instance, an example is the case of Värmland, just to illustrate you a bit more what is smart specialization. So you have Värmland that has a very strong ICT sector, and it also has challenges when it comes to societal changes. And one of the outcome of the smart specialization strategy is to use ICT and digitalization in order to improve the access to welfare services. It has also been done to some other elements, looking at the bioeconomy sector environment. And also one specificity of the success of smart specialization within the Nordic region is the importance of the local innovation environment. And by this, we mean having a quite limited number of actors that know each other, and also where the trust is also a very important factor in order to get different kinds of stakeholders discussing those key thematics that could end up being part of a smart specialization strategy. And also another element that is important is the geography of the regions. And there seems to be some sort of optimal size of a region to have such smart specialization strategy. And that's why most of the regions here colored in blue are mostly rural or intermediate regions where maybe the need for such strategies is bigger than in more urban regions. And finally, the last chapter on economy that is included in the 2020 report to the state of the Nordic region is on bioeconomy. And the main aim this time was to create a pan-Nordic database on jobs that are included within the bioeconomy sector. And that's something that has been done for the first time. It has been based on existing literature, especially from Norway and Finland, that have described very much in detail what kind of sectors and jobs are part of the bioeconomy. So we've been harmonizing this data on a Nordic level and collecting this data. And one of the findings is that around 17% of the Nordic workforce in 2017 is actually part of the bioeconomy sector. And looking at the map, you can see obvious difference in distribution of this workforce across the Nordic region. You have regions in dark green, those are the ones with the highest share of population working in the bioeconomy sector, and those are mostly located in Denmark, as well as southern regions of Finland, but also the one with actually the highest share of the workforce within the bioeconomy sector is located in Greenland, where you have a third of the workforce working in a sector part of the bioeconomy. And one thing that is worth knowing is you also have the distinction between the more traditional sector of the bioeconomy, which correspond to agriculture, fishery and forestry, and the so-called new sector of the bioeconomy, which are more linked to, for instance, new type of textile, bioenergies, etc. And I will not go in detail during that presentation, but you can find differences and different maps within the actual chapter. But what I would like to stress here is more to say that these new sectors are the vast majority of jobs within the bioeconomy sector. And on an average, they correspond to around 14% of it, with even extreme numbers, especially in the Danish regions, where you have almost 20% of the workforce working in the new bioeconomy sectors. Yeah, and again, on the circles here indicates the regions with a higher share of people working in the new bioeconomy sector. So also Faroe Island and regions in Finland have to be highlighted. So those were just a brief 10-minute summary of some of the findings of the economy sections, and you will be able to look through the report to get more maps and more insight and facts about the Nordic economy. And the next part will be a small animation about the so-called regional potential index that aims at summarizing some of these findings.
Nordregio's Regional Potential Index, RPI, is constructed around 9 key socio-economic indicators to measure regional development. The region of Oslo ranks as number 1 on the list, followed by Copenhagen and Stockholm. On average, urban areas perform better than rural. Due to a dynamic labour force, Iceland and the Faroe Islands are improving their ranking from 2017. While weaker GDP and R&D investments in Norway causes lower ranking for most Norwegian regions. The ranking for regions in Denmark and Greenland is stable, while Finland and Sweden have a varied result, with some regions scoring higher and some lower than in 2017. Improvements are primarily to be found in rural regions. The Icelandic region of Østerland, for instance, jumped 12 places. But at the same time, Blekinge in Sweden dropped the furthest in the rankings, with 11 places, as a result of weaker labour and economic factors in comparison to other Nordic regions.
All right, so now you all know who is the top region within the Nordic according to the Regional Potential Index. So as it has been said, it's this region of Oslo that topped the ranking that time. And on the slide, you can see the score in different classes for all the different administrative regions within the Nordic on the right-hand side. So the darker the color, the higher the number of points the region achieved within this index. And during this presentation, I will not go too much into details about the different indicators or how each of the region is performing, but the idea is to show more, for instance, how diverse the regions within a same group are different. And that's the idea with the graph on the left-hand side, where you see the detail of the number of points for each of the 9 selected indicators for this index. And then, for instance, here you can see Oslo, which is on the top, and you can clearly see that this indicator that is colored in dark red is one of the main reasons explaining why Oslo ends on the first rank. And this indicator is actually the gross regional product per capita, which is, as you can see, much larger than even the capital region of Denmark or Stockholm, and even greater than the 3 other urban regions. And also, as you might see on the map, it's quite difficult actually to see the region of Oslo, and that's due to its quite small size corresponding actually to the municipality. And for this, I would also like to bring that it's good to be aware of these differences in geographies when comparing regions. You have, like, for instance, a quite small region in Oslo, and if you compare it with, for instance, the capital region of Denmark, that comprised Copenhagen and the big surrounding of Copenhagen, as well as the island of Bornholm. And then you also have, for instance, the region of Stockholm that is much bigger territory than the region of Oslo. And another element that we included in the chapter is to give more insight on the score of different types of regions. So the urban, intermediate, and rural region that we've been mentioning earlier during this presentation. And again, this graph aims at giving more indication on, okay, why does a urban region score more than an intermediate or rural region? And again, you can see that the red colors are a strong reason for that, for the urban regions to be having a high score, and that's, again, based on GRP and research and development investments. On the other side, you can also see on this graph that intermediate region and rural region are scoring in a quite similar way. At least the total score, it's there's almost no difference between these two groups of regions. However, looking more in detail, you can see that the intermediate region have a slightly better potential when it comes to the demographic dimension of the index, whereas the rural region are performing slightly better when it comes to the labor market. And finally, another element that is also included in the chapter is then digging into all the different rural regions. And again, you can see a big variety of context or situation within these rural regions across the Nordic region. And those are due to, of course, local and regional aspects, but also domestic context. As you can see here on the graph, most of the regions topping the group of rural regions are actually located in Iceland, where the labor and the economy has been growing during the last couple of years, contributing to these rural regions to perform pretty well in the ranking. So again, those are just different ways of looking at the ranking, and there's much more in the report that you can have a further look at also having the very specific score for each of the 66 administrative regions within the Nordics.
I guess I just want to wrap up by saying thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's really a pleasure for us to present this report to you. It's the culmination of a great deal of work from a great many people at Nordregio. And we've touched actually only on a really small part of it today. So there's actually a whole section of the report that we haven't had time to discuss beyond GDP, which includes a chapter on wellbeing and also carbon neutral futures for the Nordic region. And if you found what we presented today interesting and you'd like to learn more, we're actually planning throughout February, we will host a webinar series, including a whole webinar dedicated to each of the themes discussed today, and one on carbon neutrality. So yeah, that will be a chance to meet the authors, and hopefully we might get more time for your questions within those webinars as well. Yeah, so that's something coming up, and you can also look out in your inboxes tomorrow for Nordregio magazine. So if you feel like maybe a shorter version, a bit more news style version of State of the Nordic Region that includes sort of, I guess, the highlights of the report from a newsy point of view. And finally, I also just want to apologise a little bit that some of the maps might have been a little bit difficult to see, a little bit too small to be able to really see them well. But we hope that will just be an incentive for you to visit the online version of the publication, where you'll be able to see them in all their perfect glory. So you all have the link there, and we invite you, and we hope that you will really enjoy reading the publication as much as we enjoy putting it together.
Yeah. That was all for today. Thank you.